blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Spirit of life, once again together. Spirit of life, come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Friends, as individuals, we have these deep roots in the faith, but as a community, we share roots in the faith. As a conference of the United Church of Canada, we share roots in the faith. I may be corrected, Joe Ramsey maybe could correct me, but I believe that Saskatchewan Conference is the only of the United Church conferences that is entirely defined by our provincial boundaries. You know the province, hardest to spell but easiest to draw? There is that which serves as roots to Saskatchewan Conference. Some of those roots straight from this province that defines us. In 2005, when we celebrated the centennial of this province, Tannis Schmidt wrote an anthem for that occasion. Tannis is going to share that song with us and perhaps invite us to join in a bit.
You know, it's funny you talked about easy to draw, because just last night on the news, a reporter asked people across the country what they think when they hear Saskatchewan. I was so interested in hearing this just last night. Some people, most, drew the shape. That's what they did. And some thought maybe Saskatchewan people are personable and friendly. And another named the capital, Saskatoon. Whoops. Well, in this song, I tried to depict Saskatchewan in a song, and I hope you will recognize it and it will resonate with you to set the scene for you to refer to. Saskatchewan, where the skies come alive and the people work together hand in hand. Saskatchewan, where the spirits soar high and the people share their lives with the land. The graceful prairie lily and the lofty work birch tree help provide the setting for a wildlife-rich prairie. The scenery is magical, each season so defined. The lush green summers, sparkling winters, beauty underlined. Saskatchewan, where the skies come alive and the people work together hand in hand. Saskatchewan, where the spirits soar high and the people share their lives with the land. From the sunrise in the morning to the harvest moon at night, across the sky in evening, watch the northern lights take flight. The spirit of Saskatchewan is generosity, a land of dreams and promise, full of possibility. Saskatchewan, where the skies come alive and the people work together walk together hand in hand. Saskatchewan, where our spirits are high and the people share their lives with the land. And the people share their lives with the land.
When I had the job of Premier, I used to think it was part of my job description to travel the nation, in fact, to travel parts of the globe and talk about this place we have defined as Saskatchewan, this corner of Turtle Island, which we call Saskatchewan. And I would talk a lot about the uniqueness of our place and our space and our people. I would talk about our mountain removal project, which has been completed many years ago. I would talk about a prairie in some parts of our province, a prairie that is so flat that you can see the future coming. And I would talk about a forest that's larger than the nation of Germany and 100,000 lakes. And I would talk about our rich cultures of our Aboriginal peoples who signed treaty to welcome immigrants from Europe and from Asia and now from every corner of the globe. I would tell them of a province who chose as its motto, from many peoples, strength. I would talk about the resources of this land. You know, we have more than half the arable land in all of Canada in the boundaries of Saskatchewan. I could talk about our innovation. I could talk about our hockey players, our poets. I could talk of a people who are at once reserved and hospitable. I can tell of a people who are at once fiercely independent and yet fiercely cooperative. So old habits die hard. And now when I travel, I'm speaking of a United Church Conference from this same province. And I'm speaking of the uniqueness of Saskatchewan Conference. We have, friends, I believe, roots as a conference which are unique. And I'm just going to touch on 5 of them quickly. Now, no secret, we share with every other United Church, with every other conference, the roots in the union of the Canadian Methodist Church, the Congregational Union of Canada, and 2/3 of Canadian Presbyterians. We share that root. What is perhaps less known is that 3 of the most dominant voices propelling the union of the United Church of Canada were from the West, and they were from this province, and they were Walter Murray, first president of the University of Saskatchewan, Edmund Oliver, first principal of St. Andrew's College and first dean of history at the University of Saskatchewan, and Walter Scott, the first premier. Each of them committed Presbyterians who promoted vigorously the union. What may be less known is that in rural communities in Saskatchewan in the early 20th century, 100 years ago, many rural communities in this province had very little patience for religious competition among Protestant denominations. And local union churches were being forged right across Saskatchewan, the first one being in Melville in 1908. Get this, by the time the union occurred in 1925 across Canada, there were no fewer than 400 union congregations in the province of Saskatchewan, more than in any other province, with populations much greater than Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan Conference has the deepest roots in being a uniting and united church in Canada. So was it their faith? Or was it their vision? Or was it their practicality? I think it was all 3. We have a root of being a uniting church. That's deep in us. And it's there because of our faith, because of our vision, and because of our prairie pragmatism. It is just who we are. Secondly, it was this conference who pioneered the ministry of women. It was this conference who pioneered the cause of the ordination of women. 2 years before church union, in 1923, Lydia Grucci was the first graduate of what was then the Presbyterian Theological School, which became St. Andrew's School. 2 years before union, Lydia Grucci was graduating in preparation for ordination. In 1926, immediately following the union, with the support of Saskatchewan Conference, Lydia Grucci sought ordination in the United Church of Canada, 1926. It took our United Church of Canada 10 years to catch up to Saskatchewan Conference. She wasn't ordained until 1936. This conference then happily ordained Lydia Grucci in 1936 at St. Andrew's Church in Moose Jaw, the first United Church woman to be ordained in all of Canada. Lydia's story is part of our roots. But so, if I may say, are the stories of many, many passionate and amazing women who have shaped and served this conference. We saw a slide earlier. Deep in the roots of this church are the Women's Missionary Society and the Women's Auxiliaries, and in combination, the United Church Women. And friends, I do not think we should neglect the force of the ecumenical Women's Christian Temperance Union. I just give you a little example of what the WCTU could do. From Zion Methodist Church in Moose Jaw and then Zion United Church in Moose Jaw, the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, sent Al Capone back to Chicago. And if that may be questionable, I tell you what's not questionable. They drove out a crooked police chief and a crooked police force. And they cleaned up River Street. The Women's Christian Temperance Union. Women to be reckoned with. Now, we may smile a little at their cause, but we can only hold their passion in highest regard. Deep in our roots as Saskatchewan Conference are the passionate ministries and labors and faith of women. It's just who we are. We've been early in this conference to embrace feminist theology. We were early to adopt inclusive language. We've been early to support the ordination of all sexual orientations and gender identities. We've been early in raising up affirming congregations. It's just who we are. From the earliest days, we've been shaped in this conference by a progressive theological legacy. We have been rooted in a social gospel. We have been a conference both justice-seeking and justice-driven. We have given voice to issues of economic injustice and environmental stewardship where often others have remained silent. And we have done this often at our own peril. At the very height of that depression and drought of the last century, in the 1930s, we elected from this conference that same Edmund Oliver, who was principal of St. Andrew's College, as the first moderator to come from Saskatchewan. Edmund Oliver's granddaughter, Sheila Lavender, is here somewhere in the court. There she is. Edmund Oliver, as moderator of the United Church, boarded the trains and rode coast to coast to coast, pleading with Canadians for aid on behalf of prairie families caught in the dual economic curse of drought and depression. But in those rallies, which attracted hundreds and thousands of people, across the country, Edmund Oliver not only pled for charity, he equally challenged the fundamentals of an economy that could so devastate human lives. He named the causes of economic injustice. He pled for charity, but he called for social justice in the name of Jesus the Christ. It's just who we are. You may not know this, but continually, since 1966, next year will be the 50th anniversary. Continually, since 1966, Saskatchewan Conference has presented a brief to the government of this province. I think this is absolutely unique in Canada. And I know for a fact that ours is the only church who presents such a brief to the provincial government. There was a short time I used to be on the preparation side of that equation. I used to sit for a very short time on the brief committee writing the brief, and then I found myself on the other side of the table getting the brief. It's a lot easier writing it, I tell you. And I can only speak for the administrations that I know, and that being the government of Roy Romano and the government of my own. Now I can tell you, maybe I shouldn't, but I will. Roy Romano used to be always saying to me, he's an Orthodox Catholic. And he used to say with some real meaning, is that United Church really an organized religion? He seems to think we should have bishops to qualify. But in Roy's administration and in mine, the presentation of the United Church brief was what we used to call a command performance. That meant, if it was a CP, command performance, it meant that all ministers were expected and required to be in attendance at the presentation unless they had provided valid reason to the Premier's office why they could not be there. And I can tell you today that while it may not have always been immediately apparent, changes in the public policy of the province of Saskatchewan have been influenced by the United Church brief. I can tell you that changes occurred in human rights legislation. I can tell you that changes occurred in minimum wage regulation and provision. I can tell you that because of the brief, changes were made in social assistance policy, and then some changes were reversed as a result of the brief. And without any fear of contradiction, since I wrote the legislation, I can tell you that we have a statutory holiday in February and more statutory holidays than any other jurisdiction in Canada because of a sermon I heard preached in the United Church of Canada that called for fair provision for the worker. When I tell the newcomers to our conference about this tradition of interaction between church and government, not always a successful interaction, but ongoing and consistent, it always surprises them. It doesn't surprise us. We've been doing it 50 years. It's just who we are. It's our roots. We are a conference deeply rooted in the notion that the gospel intersects with economy, that the gospel intersects with the body politic. With the shape of society, it intersects with the created world. Perhaps more than any other conference of the United Church of Canada, our roots in progressive Christianity have helped shape this conference and this province. At the same time, we confess that our theological legacy is mixed. As Sandra Beardsall describes it in the Encyclopedia of Saskatchewan, she says, quote, "We have been a colonialist church, equating Protestant Christianity with British Canadian cultural norms. On the colonialist side, we have at times assumed the superiority of our Anglo-Saxon culture. We have worked for the assimilation of immigrants. And we continued to operate residential schools in Saskatchewan until the middle of the last century. We've had to make apology to our Aboriginal brothers and sisters well before our national church and well before governments. We have had to assume humility in the light of truth and reconciliation. This, too, is who we are. It's in our roots. I want to suggest one other thing that I find in our roots: an ethos of hospitality. In this, I think we're an awful lot like the Carriganas. You see, for the most part, my grandpa planted those Carriganas as a windbreak to protect their little house in the south side of Aylesbury against that wind of the drought and the blizzards of winter. He planted them because he was an old Englishman who loved his little English garden, and he wanted just a little touch of green in that brown, depressed drought. He grew them to try and make this inhospitable prairie just a little more hospitable. In our communities, wherever our churches have been and are, we have been the church of hospitality. You remember that little story about the elementary school teacher, and she invited her students, if they had any kind of a faith tradition in their home, if they wanted to bring something for show and tell, to teach of their faith tradition. And so the little Jewish guy, he brought a menorah. And the little Muslim brought a copy of the Koran. And the little girl from the Roman Catholic Church, well, she brought a rosary. And the little girl from the United Church brought a casserole. It is our symbol. The United Church in Saskatchewan is the church where spirituality and hospitality are synonymous. Ours is the church, enmeshed in community and neighborhood. Our members are the members of the church board and the rink board. Our church will bury your father when no other church will. Our ministers are not ministers just to their congregation, but to their community. We will share the fruit, bread, and pickles with everyone in our church basement. You know, we may fail greatly in some regards, but through hospitality in community, we share the love of God like few others. We are grounded in community. We are grounded in the faith. These are our roots. It is just who we are. In her report to us in this conference, our president notes that the roots of the United Church are deep in all of us. We have good roots. We've come from good stock. And if it weren't for one of the 7 deadly sins, I would say we should be proud of our roots. And because these roots are born of faithfulness, I am absolutely convinced they are roots of the church that is yet to be.